Silent screams. That's what we call ourselves. A place where the unsettling meets the unknown, where your darkest fears come alive. You see, every Halloween, something strange happens, something real. And no, I'm not talking about just your average spooky decorations or jump scares at haunted houses. I'm talking about things that go deeper, things that slip through the cracks of our world. The stories I'm about to tell you aren't just stories, they're real events that happen to people just like you. And once you've heard them, you might wish you hadn't. Alright, ready? Let's start. It all started on Halloween night 3 years ago. I was living in this quiet town, the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. The streets would get decorated with pumpkins and fake cobwebs, and the local kids would run around in their costumes, laughing with bags full of candy. You could smell the crisp autumn air and hear the leaves crunching underfoot. It was supposed to be a normal night, but things were about to get strange. I was heading over to my friend Mike's house for a Halloween party. Mike loved Halloween. Every year, he'd go all out with decorations, fake skeletons, jack-o'-lanterns, and even a fog machine. It was a bit over the top, but that was Mike for you. I wasn't really in the mood for a party that year, but he insisted I come. When I got there, the place looked exactly like you'd expect, a typical Halloween setup, but maybe a little too quiet. As I walked inside, I noticed something odd. The house felt colder. Not just the usual autumn chill, but a deeper cold, one that felt like it was creeping under your skin. And the weirdest part, no one else seemed to notice. Everyone was drinking, laughing, having a good time, but there was this uneasy feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. "Hey, glad you made it," Mike shouted from across the room, waving a beer in my direction. I forced a smile and waved back, trying to shake the feeling. Maybe it was just me, maybe I was imagining it. But that cold, it didn't go away. A couple of hours went by, and the party was in full swing. I was standing by the snack table, absent-mindedly eating chips when something caught my eye. A figure. Just for a second, I saw something standing at the top of the stairs. They were tall, shadowy, just standing there watching. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked Mike, who was now standing beside me. "See what?" he asked, popping a piece of candy into his mouth. "There was someone at the top of the stairs," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I swear I saw someone." Mike laughed. "It's probably just someone from the party." "Relax, man. You're letting Halloween get to you." But I wasn't convinced. I had this sinking feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't explain it. So I brushed it off and tried to enjoy the party, but that uneasy feeling never left. Later that night, as the party was winding down, I started talking to this girl, Emily. She'd come with one of Mike's friends, and we were chatting about random stuff when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I froze. That cold, creeping feeling was back, stronger this time. It was like the air around us had turned to ice. I nodded, too afraid to speak. She glanced toward the hallway where the staircase was, and I followed her gaze. There it was again, the figure. Tall, shadowy, and this time it wasn't going away. It was standing at the bottom of the stairs, just staring at us. "Who is that?" Emily whispered, clutching my arm. I don't know," I replied, my voice barely audible. We stood there, frozen in place, watching this thing. It didn't move, it didn't make a sound, but it was there, and it was watching us. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Just for a second, the room went dark, and when the lights came back on, the figure was gone. Emily let out a shaky breath. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded in agreement. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to stick around to find out. I grabbed my coat, and we made our way to the front door. As we stepped outside, the cold air hit us, but it wasn't the same as before. This was normal, this was real. The unease lingered, but at least we were out of that house. Do you think it was a trick?" Emily asked as we walked down the street, her voice still shaking. "I don't know," I replied honestly. But whatever it was, it felt wrong. We walked in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say. We didn't talk about the figure, or the cold, or the way the lights flickered. But we both knew something strange had happened. Something neither of us could explain. A few days passed, and I tried to forget about it. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the figure wasn't real. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. It was late one night, about a week after the party, when I heard a knock on my door. It was around midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe some kids playing a prank, but then I heard it again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I got up, my heart racing, and made my way to the door. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. I opened the door a crack, and still nothing. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just silence. I was about to close the door when I heard it. A whisper. Faint, but unmistakable. It sounded like my name. "Come outside," it whispered. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I backed away, my hands shaking, and then I heard it again. The knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I called Mike. I needed to know if he'd seen anything, if he'd experienced anything strange since the party. When I asked him, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Actually, yeah," he said finally. "I've been hearing things. Knocks on the door, voices whispering at night. I thought it was just my imagination, but now that you mention it, I didn't know what to say. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just me. Something had followed us from that night, something we couldn't see, but we could feel it. The days turned into weeks, and the knocks became more frequent. Every night at the same time, 3 knocks. And every night the whispers. Sometimes it was my name, sometimes it was something else, something I couldn't quite make out. But whatever it was getting louder, closer. Emily called me one night, panicked. She'd been hearing the same things, the knocks, the whispers. She told me she felt like something was watching her, following her. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. I didn't know what we were dealing with. And then one night it escalated. I was lying in bed, trying to ignore the knocks when I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from outside my bedroom door. My heart was racing, but I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The footsteps stopped just outside my door, and then silence. I lay there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move. And then the door creaked open. Just a crack. Enough for me to see nothing. There was no one there. But the door kept creaking open slowly until it was fully open, and I was staring into the dark hallway. And then I saw it. The figure. Tall, shadowy, standing at the end of the hallway, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It didn't move, but I could feel its presence, feel it watching me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, trapped in my own fear. The figure took a step forward, and then another, slowly making its way toward me. And that's when I heard the whisper again. "Come outside." Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. All I could do was watch as the figure got closer and closer until it was standing right in front of me. And then darkness. I woke up the next morning, my heart pounding, my body drenched in sweat. I looked around, but there was no sign of the figure. No sign that anything had happened. But I knew it wasn't a dream. It was real. And it was only the beginning. Something had followed us from that Halloween night. Something dark, something evil. And it wasn't going to stop until it had what it wanted. But what that was, I still don't know. And that's the scariest part. I'm not sure how long I lay there, frozen with terror, but when the dawn finally broke, it felt like the nightmare had ended. Except it hadn't. The fear still clung to me, cold and suffocating, even as the sunlight streamed through the windows. I tried to convince myself it was all just some elaborate hallucination, the result of too many horror movies, maybe too much stress. But I knew deep down it wasn't. Something had followed me from Mike's party, something dark, and now it was closer than ever. The next few nights were worse. The knocks came more frequently, sometimes at the front door, sometimes at my bedroom window, which was impossible. My room was on the second floor. Every night, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Sometimes they called my name. Other times they were unintelligible, garbled voices that seemed to rise from the walls themselves. It felt like the entire house was alive with something malevolent, something that had its eyes on me. Emily stopped answering my calls. Mike too. I didn't blame them. We were all too scared, too wrapped up in whatever this thing was. But being alone made everything worse. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the knocks, for the whispers. Every creak of the house sent my heart racing. Shadows seemed to shift and move in the corners of my vision, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing. Just an empty room. But I could feel it watching me. Then, one night, something changed. It was around 3 a.m. The hour of the dead, they say. I was lying in bed, wide awake, when I heard the knock again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, just like every night before. But this time, there was something different. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me, suffocating me. My skin prickled, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I knew, without even looking, that it was here, inside. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to see it. But I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, I turned my head toward the door, and there it was, the figure. Standing in the doorway, tall and shadowy, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And then, as if in response to my terror, the figure took a step forward. My body tensed, but I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed, frozen in place by some unseen force. The figure took another step, and another, slowly making its way toward my bed. The closer it got, the colder the room became. I could see my breath in the air, feel the chill seep into my bones. It stopped at the foot of my bed, its glowing eyes locked on mine. For a long, terrifying moment, we just stared at each other. Then slowly it raised its hand, pointing toward the window. I followed its gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. There, outside the window, was another figure. Identical to the one standing in my room, its glowing eyes staring in at me from the darkness. My pulse quickened as a third figure appeared behind it, and then a fourth. I felt the air leave my lungs as the figures pressed their faces against the glass, their mouths stretching into grotesque, unnatural smiles. And then the whispering started again. This time, it was louder, more distinct. "Come outside." The words echoed through the room, overlapping voices, some low and guttural, others high-pitched and distorted. It felt like the house itself was speaking to me, demanding that I obey. I tried to get out of bed, but my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped. The figure at the foot of my bed leaned closer, its glowing eyes burning into mine. I could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on me, like it was sucking the very life out of the room. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The figures disappeared, the whispering ceased, and the air returned to normal. But the fear remained, gnawing at my insides. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I packed a bag. I didn't care where I went. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Whatever was haunting me wasn't going to stop. I knew that now. I drove for hours, not really sure where I was going, just trying to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. Eventually, I ended up at a motel on the outskirts of town. It was dingy and run down, but at least it wasn't my house. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The oppressive weight that had been following me was gone, or at least it seemed that way. I checked into the room and collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with me. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, the sun had already set and the familiar sense of dread had returned. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I knew something was wrong. The air in the room felt thick again, like it had back in my house. I glanced around, my eyes darting from corner to corner, searching for any sign of the figures. But there was nothing, just the empty room. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then I heard it. The knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. This time, it wasn't at the door. It was coming from the mirror. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Slowly, I turned toward the mirror, my reflection staring back at me. But something was wrong. The room in the reflection was different, darker. And standing behind me, in the reflection, was the figure. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine. My heart leaped into my throat as I whipped around, but the room was empty. I looked back at the mirror, and the figure was still there, standing behind me in the reflection. Closer now. I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't run from it. I couldn't hide. It was always there, always watching. And then the whispering started again. Come outside. The words echoed through the room, louder this time. I could feel the pull, the invisible force drawing me toward the door. I tried to fight it, but it was no use. My legs moved on their own, carrying me toward the door. I stumbled out of the motel room, the cold night air hitting me like a wall. The parking lot was empty, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. But I could feel it. I could feel them watching me. I turned slowly, and there they were. The figures, lined up along the edge of the parking lot, their glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. One by one, they stepped forward, their movements slow and deliberate, like they were savoring the moment. I backed away, my heart racing, but there was nowhere to go. The figures closed in, their whispers growing louder, more frantic. Come outside. Come outside. Come outside. I pressed myself against the wall of the motel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figures were almost upon me, their hands reaching out, their whispers deafening. And then, just as they were about to touch me, they stopped. For a long, terrifying moment, they just stood there, staring at me with those glowing eyes. And then, one by one, they began to disappear, fading into the darkness until there was nothing left but the cold night air. I collapsed to the ground, my body shaking with fear and exhaustion. I didn't know why they had stopped, why they had spared me, but I wasn't about to question it. I don't know how long I stayed there, sitting in the parking lot, too afraid to move. But eventually, I got up and made my way back into the motel room, my legs trembling beneath me. The rest of the night passed without incident, and when the morning came, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep running from this thing, whatever it was. It wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. So I went back to the house. When I arrived, the house was just as I had left it. Dark, cold, and empty. But there was something different this time. The air felt heavier, more oppressive, like the house itself was waiting for me. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked shut behind me, and the familiar sense of dread washed over me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had to end this. I made my way to the living room, where it had all started. The room was just as I remembered it, but now there was something else. Something dark and twisted, lurking just beneath the surface. I stood there for a long time, waiting. And then the figures appeared. They stepped out of the shadows, one by one, their glowing eyes fixed on me. The whispering started again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't asking me to come outside. It was asking me to stay. I didn't move. I didn't run. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. What do you want? I whispered, my voice trembling. The figures didn't respond. They just stood there, watching me, their whispers growing louder, more frantic. And then, all at once, they disappeared. The room was silent. The oppressive weight lifted, and for the first time in weeks, I felt free. Whatever had been haunting me, whatever had followed me from that night, it was gone. I don't know why it stopped, or what it had wanted in the first place. But I don't care. All I know is that it's over. And for the first time in a long time, I can breathe again.